after the firing the shot was in training protocol, putting that gun immediately on his knee out of sight.
Yes, sir. Common sense.
Well, it's common sense and training, correct?
Yes, sir.
Immediately after the shot took place, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you're taught as a police officer that the minute that you stop the threat, you don't keep shooting, right?
That's correct.
One shot in this case, and only one. Correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Training protocol. Is following that training.
Yes, sir.
You finished that interview with Mr. Reeves. And let's talk about the time, because I want to make sure we've got this time sequence nice and tight. What time did you finish, Mr. Reeves? 3:40. I thought you wrote it down on that piece of paper there.
I finished at 3:40.
At 3:40.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so now you are going into what investigative mode? What are you doing now? After you finish that, you go to Mrs. Reeves, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so let's talk. What time do you start Mrs. Reeves?
One moment, sir.
I'm sorry.
I started that interview at 16:25.
Also known as 4:25, right?
Yes, sir.
16:25. And you finished that interview at 16:38.
That's correct.
How many minutes is that?
That's 30.
I hope it's not 30.
No, 30, 45 minutes. Oh, you talking about for Miss Reeves? I apologize, sir.
Yes, that's okay.
That's 13 minutes.
You had a 13-minute interview with Mrs. Reeves.
That's correct.
And this one you recorded immediately. No pre-recording by you.
That's correct.
And she was a witness, not a suspect.
That's correct.
And so you didn't violate the protocol of the sheriff's office.
That's correct.
And Mrs. Reeves likewise told you that she was scared.
Objection, Judge, to hearsay.
Sustained.
Okay. You spoke to Mrs. Reeves for 13 minutes, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so after that 13-minute interview with Mrs. Reeves, you decide to go back and interview Curtis again, right? So let's try to take the scenario if I can. Alan, Angela, right?
Yes, sir.
Curtis,
Yes, sir.
Mrs. Reeves,
Yes, sir.
now back to Curtis, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so when you go back to Curtis, what time was that? I've got it right here if that makes it easier.
16:43.
16:43. 16:43, right? Which would have been what?
4:43.
4:43. And then you finished that at 16:48.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Let's talk about between 16:43 and your last interview with Mrs. Reeves. You finished Mrs. Reeves' interview at 16:38. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
And you started Mr. Reeves' second interview at 16:43.
According to my notes, yes, sir.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
How many minutes is that?
5.
5 minutes. Okay. And so in between that period of time, after you interviewed Mrs. Reeves for the second time, your testimony is that you go to the command center.
We have a meeting. It's not really a center, but command center, but we have a meeting out in front of the theater.
Okay, so you have to, let's see if I can get this correctly. You were interviewing Mrs. Reeves in the same room?
I believe so, sir.
Okay, and so you have to leave that room, have to leave the theater, you got to go through the doors,
Right.
and go out into the parking lot where you had your makeshift command center, right?
That meeting occurs right there outside the front of the theater, right there in front of the box office.
Okay, and would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury again the purpose of that meeting?
To discuss the case, the information that patrol deputy or detectives had received from their witnesses, their interviews.
To discuss the case. So that's a very important meeting, is it not?
Yes, sir.
Because you're trying to get information from all the various sources of witnesses that are being interviewed, correct?
Yes, sir.
And these witnesses are being given voluntary statements for them to write down what, in their opinion, they saw. Right?
Yes, sir.
And so that's a lot to look over, right?
Yes, sir.
And so it must have taken you probably, what, a minute to get from the room that you were interviewing Mrs. Reeves to that meeting up front?
Possibly, yes, sir.
So that leaves us 4 minutes. And so now, it must have taken you at least 3 minutes to go from the meeting to go back to Mr. Reeves, right?
I'm not for sure, sir, how long it would have taken.
Well, he was in the back, right?
Yes,
In a
sir.
car. And the meeting was out front of the theater.
Yes, sir.
But it'd take you at least 3 minutes to get there, right?
There again, sir, I don't know. It would have
So
taken.
you must have had a 1 minute meeting with your group outside the theater, because those are the numbers, right?
Yes, sir.
A 1 minute meeting you had to discuss all of the evidence that allegedly had been uncovered at that point, right? 1 minute.
I tend to believe, sir, it was longer than that.
Well, the numbers don't add up, right?
That's correct.
And so tell me who you spoke to outside the Cobb Theater for a minute that gave you enough information for you to go back and tell Mr. Reeves that you were going to charge him with second-degree murder.
We had stood there and talked. The detectives, command staff was there. Sergeant or Captain Eckley, Major Corbin, the sheriff, Detective Harris, Sergeant Sessa, and they had said that no one had seen a punch being thrown, and that no one had seen the suspect coming over the chair.
Oh, you must have told him, wait a minute, I spoke to Mr. Hamilton. He says, yeah, that, Olson was leaning over the chair and he was yelling and he was cursing. I'm sure you told Captain Sessa that.
Your Honor, I'd object to the characterization of the question. Leaning over and coming over are two very different things.
Sustained.
What did you tell Captain Sessa about your interview with Mr. Hamilton?
Sergeant Sessa.
Sergeant, sorry.
I think we didn't go into in depth. We didn't go in depth. We simply wanted to know if anybody had seen a punch being thrown or anything being thrown at the victim, or at the suspect. We wanted to determine if anybody thought that the shooting was justifiable.
Well, in a minute, that's hard to do, right?
There again, sir, my times could be off.
Well, times are important, aren't they?
They are.
They're critical. They're part of the evidence, right?
That's correct.
And in a homicide case especially, we can't afford to to not be correct, right?
It's very important, sir.
And so, nobody saw a punch being thrown. Nobody saw a phone. That was like the deciding factor for you, right?
Being thrown.
The being.
Yes, sir.
And so, darkened theater, correct?
Yes, sir.
You don't know how dark it was because you weren't in there to see it for yourself.
That's correct, sir.
You hadn't gone back into the crime scene and said to the manager, please turn the lighting to the lighting that was present during the previews so that I can sit in this chair that Mr. Reeves was sitting and I could experience what he was experiencing. You never did that
No, sir.
before you had that meeting with, I guess it's the brass of the sheriff's office, right?
That's correct, sir.
You never went to the manager and told the manager, hey, by the way, I also want you, in addition to put the lights down, I want you to put those previews on. Because I want to sit in that chair and I want to experience whether the loudness of the previews
Your Honor, I'd object.
had any effect.
From the approach, or it's just an improper form of questioning.
I'll overrule.
You never did that, did you?
No, sir, I did not.
And did you tell the brass there at the Pasco Sheriff's Office, say, by the way, I haven't even gone into the crime scene? Did you tell them that?
No, sir. We were aware of...
Well, you may have been aware. You didn't tell them that you had not been in that crime scene. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Detective, the first time that you went into that crime scene was at 5:32 in the afternoon.
If I may.
You may, please. You maybe want me to try to hide it for you really quickly?
Yes, sir, because I don't seem to have it noted here. You have the crime scene line?
I think I do. At my fingertips.
Thank you, sir.
May I approach?
You may.
It's in the first page, Detective, very top.
There you go. Yeah, I apologize, sir. 1732. That's
Thank
correct.
you. May I have it back?
Yes, sir.
Now, let's talk about that very important process of the case, because your job's not over, right?
No, sir.
You may have told Mr. Reeves and charged Mr. Reeves at that point with second-degree murder. Let's talk about the number. Was it 2 hours and in 2 hours and 16 minutes from your arrival, you're charging Mr. Reeves with second-degree murder? In 2 hours and 15 minutes, 16 minutes. That's why I became a lawyer. My math is. Tell me if I'm right.
About that, yes, sir.
Okay. So now, your job's not over, is it?
No, sir.
Your job now, you're going at 5:32 for the first time into this, and let me call it an incident scene, because that's what it is, correct?
Objection. I don't even know how to phrase this, improper.
It's an incident scene where the incident happened. Correct?
Overrule. Overrule.
It's only a crime scene if someone's at fault. Would you not agree?
I consider it to be a crime scene.
You consider it to be a crime scene. Okay, so we'll call it a crime scene. So now you go into the crime scene and Detective Smith is there, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you have some forensic people there as well, right?
That's correct.
You already know about the phone.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
But you still don't know what seat Mr. Reeves was actually in.
Pointed out that seat at that time.
Well, we're going to get to that.
Okay.
Okay. And so when you go in there, you don't know what seat Mr. Reeves was in.
I knew that it was on the back row. I knew that it was in the center, but the actual numbered seat, I did not know.
Okay. And so when you go in there, do you see the phone? Do you see the phone at 5:32 in the position of that aisle?
I'm not for sure, sir, if I saw it there or if it was pinned with a pin marker.
Meaning that there could have been a pin marker there, but the phone may not have been there.
That's correct.
And so I'm sure that at some point in time in your investigation post-entry of the crime scene, that you discovered that the phone had a black case. Correct?
Yes, sir.
And so if, excuse me a second, Your Honor. If I am throwing a dark object in a darkened theater, you may not be able to see it. Right?
That would make sense, yes, sir.
That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
It would be difficult. It would be possible that that could happen.
So did you go up to Smith and say, let me see the phone? Let me see the phone. I want to see the phone.
No, sir. I knew what a cell phone looked like. We did not want to. We don't handle phones. We had photographed it. We knew where it was at. We had pinned. They were handling the crime scene properly.
Well, you hadn't been in there. If you arrived at 2:15, you hadn't been in there for at least 3.5 hours, right?
That's correct.
And so you don't know what was happening in there with Detective Smith at the helm, right?
There again, sir, I have complete confidence in my team of forensic investigators and Detective Aaron Smith.
So let me ask you this question. So, of importance, obviously, to you was the darkness of the theater, right?
That's one of the important things. That's correct.
Okay, and so at that point in time, at 5:32 in the afternoon, did you go and get a manager to say, I want you to dim those lights?
Objection, asked and answered.
No, that's at 5:32. At 5:32, did you do that?
No, sir.
Overruled.
Was that not important at that point?
I'm sorry, sir.
Was that not important?
What?
To get those lights down, while now you're in the crime scene for the first time.
Yes, sir.
So was that not important to you?
I did not. I didn't do it, sir. At the time, I didn't think of that.
This is your only opportunity, Detective, you would agree with me, to recreate the scene that Mr. Reeves was experiencing. You could have sat in that chair. You could have put the lights on at the preview level. You could have put the previews on. You could have had someone that was 6'4" from the battalion of officers that you had there standing where Mr. Olson was. You did none of that.
No, sir.
Well, let me ask you this. Did you get your crime scene technicians that were there in order to memorialize by cameras that very experience?
That day, no, sir.
I thought you were in charge of this homicide case.
I was.
Did you ask Mr. Smith, hey, Detective Smith, we've got some lady here by the name of Amy Parrish who has had extensive training in being able to capture photographs in darkened areas. She's got some expertise in that. Let's get her to do that here. Did you do that with Detective Smith?
Not that. No, sir. Not that day.
Not that day.
No, sir.
Why not that day?
I didn't think of it, sir, at the time.
You didn't think of it.
No, sir.
And was that because you had only had one case in the past dealing with self-defense, Detective? Is that the reason why you didn't do these things? Difficult question, isn't it?
I tried my best to do the very best job that I could as far as the investigation.
Detective, I don't doubt that you tried to do your best. That wasn't the question.
Right.
The question is, do you think that the reason that you didn't do these things is because at that point in time, you did not have the experience in dealing with a self-defense case.
I had limited experience with that. Yes, sir. That could be a possibility.
Possibilities are dangerous in our criminal justice system, you would agree?
Yes, sir.
We can't afford to make mistakes, can we, Detective?
No, sir.
Because you have a man's life in your hands as well.
Your Honor, at this point, I would object.
Sustained. If you have much more, it's time for a...
We do have quite a
Right.
bit.
All right, let's take a 10-minute recess, please. Remember my instructions during the break? Thank you.
All rise, court is in recess for 10 minutes. Did everyone stay seated?
Hey, Stephen? Hang on one sec. That new camera, all right. Are we ready to proceed? Okay, Tina.
Jurors in the courtroom, Your Honor.
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Were you all able to abide by my instructions during the recess? All righty. Mr. Escobar, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Proctor, you're still under oath.
Thank you, ma'am.
Detective, I'll keep calling you detective, I'm sorry. Mr. Proctor.
That's fine, sir.
Before going back into that theater, or before going into the theater for the first time, anybody give you the name of Joanna Turner?
Not by name, sir.
Well, what did they give you if they didn't give it to you by name?
After the meeting, or after I went into the theater, there was a meeting of,
We're not there yet. I'm saying
Okay.
before you went into the theater.
yes, sir.
At 5:32 in the afternoon.
Yes, sir.
Did the name Joanna Turner, was that given to you?
No, sir.
Despite the fact that you had the meeting with supposedly all of the brass and discussing all of the interviews and all of voluntary forms and all of that. Right?
Yes, sir.
And certainly nobody gave you a voluntary form there at that meeting with the brass that had the name Joanna Turner for you to read.
No, sir.
In fact, you didn't read a single voluntary statement that had been given by any witness prior to going into the theater at 5:32.
The Hamiltons.
Well, that was because you interviewed them, right?
Right.
No, I'm talking about from the brass at the meeting.
No, sir, I didn't read any written statements there.
Okay. So now you go into the theater, and even though it was 2013, we are at an age where surveillance cameras are pretty common, right?
Yes, sir.
It didn't have to be 2022 for that to happen, right?
That's correct, sir.
In 2013, surveillance cameras were pretty popular.
Wasn't it 2014, Mr.
Excuse me,
Escobar?
2014.
Yes, sir.
Am I correct?
They were popular, yes, sir.
They'd been popular for quite some time.
Sir?
They'd been popular for quite some time.
Yes, sir.
And so when you went into that theater, you immediately realized that there were cameras in that theater, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so as you walked into the general theater, you looked up. There was one to your right, and there was another one to your left, right?
And Theater 10?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so when you looked up and saw those cameras, you realized with all the years of law enforcement experience that you had that video surveillance is important, right?
Yes, sir.
And when you see cameras, you're going to go and watch that film as quickly as you can,
Yes, sir.
because you don't want that film to be destroyed, right?
That's correct.
And that film can have incredible opportunities in your investigation, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so you didn't do that. You didn't go to management at the cop theater and say, Mr. Manager, I'd like to be able to see whatever is on that film. You didn't do that.
No, sir, I did not.
And you would agree with me that you later found out that you didn't even have to go to the IT room upstairs in order to view that video, correct? You could have done it from the manager's desk.
I wasn't aware of that, sir.
You weren't.
No, sir.
It's because you never asked anybody, right?
No, sir, I'm not computer savvy. I'm definitely not video savvy. We had those people with the sheriff's office there to
Cybercrime.
Thank you, sir. We had cyber crimes there to obtain all of that.
So if you're not computer savvy and you've got the battalion of cybercrime there, you had Bousson, correct?
Yes, sir.
You had Lindsay, correct?
Yes, sir.
You had Pepinella, correct?
Yes, sir. I'm not for sure who all was there the day of.
Those guys are really good, aren't they?
They are.
They're highly trained, correct?
They are.
They're highly trained to preserve evidence, correct?
They are.
In fact, that's why they were there. Correct?
To obtain the video, yes, sir.
Well, not only to obtain it correctly,
That's correct.
and to make sure that nobody, even the cop theater, could destroy it, correct?
That would be correct, sir.
Because when you're doing an investigation, you can't trust anybody else. You've got to put that trust only in the people that are employed by the Pasco Sheriff's Office, correct?
We'd like to have it that way, yes, sir.
And that's why they were there.
Yes, sir.
And so did you go over to Detective Bousson and say, Detective Bousson, I see that we've got some video here. I need you to go and I need you to preserve that evidence, period.
They told me that it was being preserved.
That's not my question.
Yes, sir.
Did you go to Detective Bousson, who is an expert in cybercrime, and say, Detective Bousson, you're here for this purpose. I want you to go and preserve that video evidence?
No, sir, I did not tell him that.
Well, why not?
He knows his job. That's his, that's what he does.
Well, unless Detective Smith tells him, I don't want you to do it, I'm going to handle it myself. Right?
Judge, I'm going to object. Calls for speculation on the part of this witness.
Sustained.
You would agree that Detective Smith was the crime scene detective, right?
Yes, sir.
And he had to make sure, like you, that things were going to be properly preserved because he is the crime scene detective.
That's correct, sir.
And in 2013,
14.
but in 2013, the year before, when he was in missing persons, you didn't know anything about Detective Smith as far as his capabilities in cybercrime. He wasn't in cybercrime, right?
I knew that he knew how to obtain video. He had assisted me before in robberies where he had obtained the video for me in other cases.
So he had obtained the video. Do you know what type of background he had in order to be able to do that?
No, sir. I knew that I didn't know all of his training, but I knew that he was very capable of obtaining the video.
But you would agree that obtaining the video doesn't mean that you tell the cop theater, hey, listen, do whatever you all want to do with the video and then give me a copy later on. That's not what you expected.
And I don't think that's what occurred.
My question is, that's not what you expected, right?
No, sir.
Okay, so you pretty much didn't have even a conversation with Smith about the video because you assumed that he was going to do something.
I remember the conversation occurring that the cop theater was not able to produce the video the day of the incident.
Oh, wait a minute. The cop theater was not able to produce the video, but you had cyber crimes there that could extract the hard drives in the proper way and preserve the video, right? You agree with that?
There again, sir, that's above my, my knowledge. I don't,
Well, you could have spoken to Bousson and say, hey, Bousson, I guess someone in the comp theater is saying that they're not gonna turn over the videos. What can we do here? Did you have that conversation with Bousson?
I did not.
You knew at that moment that the comp theater had a liability interest of their own, right?
That would be a possibility, yes, sir.
And you certainly didn't want the comp theater to be doing anything with that video, did you?
No, sir, I did not.
Did you know that at the very moment that you had walked in to that Theater 10, that the comp theater was remotely looking at the video? Did you know that?
No, sir, I did not.
So the comp theater can look at the video remotely, you're there, you can't look at the video.
It was my understanding, sir, that we could not view the video that day.
Well, was it your understanding that Detective Smith told Bousson, hey, get out of here, I'm handling this?
Judge, I'm gonna object. It calls for speculation.
No, there's no speculation about that.
Sustained, there is.
Judge Bousson is going to be testifying for me.
Okay.
Okay, so what else do you do in that crime scene other than talk to Detective Smith for a few minutes and leave?
I also, Detective Smith gave me a rundown as to where the evidence that they had collected, the evidence they were in the process of collecting, where the victim and his wife and the suspect and his wife were sitting.
Okay, did he give you the measurements?
No, sir.
Did he give you the measurements of the seats?
No, sir.
You knew that the seats had arms, correct?
Sir?
You knew the seats had arms, right?
Yes, sir.
And did those arms move up and down?
I'm not aware, sir.
And so you left the Cobb Theater without obtaining that video, those hard drives, that day, right?
That's correct, sir.
And in fact, you had posted, had you not, officers there at the Cobb Theater to not allow anybody to come in to the Cobb Theater, right?
Theater 10, yes, sir.
And you became aware that the Cobb Theater sent an IT person from Mulberry to seize the actual hard drives that very night. Correct?
I wasn't aware of that, sir.
You're not aware of that today?
I wasn't aware of that.
This is the first time you heard of it.
I was not.
Objection, counsel's testifying, facts not in evidence.
I'm not testifying, I'm asking if this is the first time he's heard that.
But where's the facts coming from you?
Oh, it's Mr. Sillis.
I'm gonna overrule.
The first time that you have heard that a Mr. Sillis, an IT person from Mulberry, came over that night, penetrated security there at the Cobb Theater and seized the videos is today?
That's correct, sir.
So I guess Detective Smith never shared that with you.
I wasn't aware of it, sir. He could have, but I don't remember that conversation occurring.
Well, if that had occurred, you'd be disappointed.
I wasn't aware of it, sir.
Were you disappointed now that you heard that today?
I'm disappointed that I didn't know it before I'm sitting here in front of a jury.
Well, are you disappointed that someone seized multitude of hard drives right under your nose?
I'm disappointed that I didn't know that.
Now, Detective,
Yes, sir.
you didn't know that the hard drives from the Cobb Theater, especially all the hard drives dealing with Theater 10, lobby and what have you. You didn't know that those hard drives had been seized and flown to Alabama?
No, sir.
Well, you didn't go to Alabama to go and retrieve those hard drives?
I did.
Well, where did you think those hard drives had come from? Thin air?
No,
Just
sir.
object, Judge.
I would rephrase, Your Honor. Where did
Thank
you
you.
think those hard drives came from?
I was not aware that the hard drives were in Wesley Chapel.
You didn't believe that the hard drives that you were getting from Alabama were the ones that were taken from the Wesley Chapel Cobb Theater?
Yes, sir. I thought the ones from Alabama are the ones from Wesley Chapel. I understand that now, but at the time, I thought that the hard drives were being remotely, that the feed was remotely to that location.
So are you telling me that when you went to Alabama, you thought that the hard drives that you were picking up were not the actual hard drives? You thought that there were some kind of copies that were done for you at the pleasure of the Cobb Theater?
No, sir. That's what I'm saying. I'm not video savvy. I don't understand all that working. And I did not realize that the hard drives, I didn't realize that they were even in Wesley Chapel.
You didn't realize that the hard drives were in Wesley Chapel because you never went into the IT room to take a look at the surveillance equipment, correct?
That's correct.
You didn't know the make and model of the system, correct?
No, sir, but I had people there that did.
You didn't know the make and model of each hard drive?
No, sir.
You didn't know which hard drive belonged to which camera, correct?
That's correct.
You didn't know if you had multiple hard drives that were supplied by any particular camera?
That's correct.
You didn't know anything about that system.
Absolutely correct.
And so, at some point in time, much days later, right? You and Smith decided, I think we better go to Alabama.
Your Honor, will we briefly approach?
Yes.
Back to those hard drives.
Yes, sir.
You went all the way to Alabama days later, right?
That's correct.
And you went with Detective Smith
That's correct.
to go and retrieve those particular hard drives that had been in the Cobb Theater on the very moment of this incident.
That's correct, sir.
And you didn't go to Cobb Theater management. You had to go to a lawyer's office for the Cobb Theater to go and retrieve those hard drives.
That's correct, sir.
And when you got the box or the luggage that the hard drives were in, it had a lock on it, right?
That's correct.
And so there at the lawyer's office, you didn't say, hey, lawyer, open this box so that we can see what's in it and we can inventory it and we can take photos before I am taking it back. Right? You didn't do any of that.
No, sir.
You left the box locked, not knowing what was in the box.
That's correct, sir.
And certainly you had done nothing prior to going to Alabama to go and check and see what system they had there at the Cobb Theater so that you could correlate as to whether, okay, this hard drive goes here, and this hard drive goes here, and this. You didn't do any of that.
No, sir.
And so now you're getting this box with You don't even know how many hard drives were in there, right?
I don't, sir.
And so you get this box that was locked, and you take it with you, and you gotta come all, did you fly or you drove?
We drove.
You drove. You drove all the way back to Pasco County, and certainly, when you got to Pasco County and you got to the evidence room, certainly you opened that box and said, okay, let's inventory it before it goes into evidence.
I did not.
Well, that's the proper protocol, right?
No, sir.
Oh, it's not. So you can just get a box that has nothing that you know of. I mean, it could have had 3 kilos of cocaine and you would have known it, right?
I'm sorry, do
I'm
that
gonna
again?
object. Is that a
That
question
box-
or a statement?
That box
Sustained.
could have had anything in it and you would have never known it.
I was told that the box contained,
Well,
The
I
hard
realize
drives.
you were told that
Yes,
by
sir.
some lawyer that was representing the interests of Cop Theater, right?
yes, sir.
But my question is that you did not know before you entered that box into evidence what was in that box. For all you know, it could have been anything. Right?
Yes, sir. I was told that it was the hard drives.
Okay. And so now you put that in evidence, right?
Yes, sir.
And the person that you call on in order to image, to copy those hard drives, is the person that was at the Cop Theater the night of January the 13th of 2014, Mr. Bousson, right?
I don't know who copies those, sir.
Well, do you know that he was the one that copied those for you?
He's part of that team.
So it stayed in evidence, tell me, stayed in evidence for a week without knowing what was in there?
Sir, I don't know.
How about a month?
I don't know, sir.
How about 3 months?
Let the witness answer, please.
My apologies.
Sir, I'm not aware how long the box remained in evidence. Cyber crimes, the state attorney's office, they were handling all of that aspect of it. We had CDs of the incident, the shooting, and I don't know how long the box remained in property and evidence.
And those CDs that you had were given to you days after the incident
A couple of days later, that's correct.
from somebody there with Cobb Theater, right?
Detective Smith obtained those.
Okay, do you know how? Do you know if he got it from a competent source, like a IT person, a computer engineer, a cybercrime expert?
I don't know who he obtained those from.
You don't. Okay. And so then at some point in time, though that box, were you responsible for also taking that box out and taking it to some gentleman in Orlando?
No, sir.
That wasn't you. That was Detective Smith.
Yes, sir. I went to Alabama to get it, and I brought it back with Detective Smith. We put it into evidence, and that was it. I simply accompanied him there for the long drive.
Detective, you would agree that you were not happy having to go to Alabama to get a vital piece of evidence that should have been preserved right here in Pasco County, right?
Do that again, sir? I'm sorry.
Yes, I'll tell you again. You were not happy over the fact that you had to go to Alabama to pick up a vital piece of evidence in this case when it should have been done right here by your cybercrime unit in Pasco County.
There again, sir, I'm not aware of how cyber crimes, how to obtain that. We were that's the way it occurred. I didn't know that the DVRs were even in Wesley Chapel. There again, cyber crimes is the one that handles that. My happiness, I wanted to obtain the video.
Let me ask you this question.
My happiness has no bearing on the trip to Alabama.
Well, let me ask you a question. You certainly interviewed John Sillis who was the IT person that came in the middle of the night and took the hard drive. You did that, right?
I did not.
Or did you direct someone to do that? Did you direct some of your detectives, hey, this John Sillis, we need to talk to him? Did you direct anybody to do that?
Sir, as I've testified to earlier, I did not know that the video had been removed, the hard drives.
I have no further questions.
Thank you. Redirect?
May I have a moment, please,
You
Judge?
may. Is that your pen, Mr. Escobar?
Oh, thank you, Your Honor. These are hard to, they don't have much ink in them.
Oh, right. It's a new wave pens.
I know. Thank you, Detective.
Yes, sir.
In your own exhibit.
May it please the court, counsel. Mr. Proctor, do you have a copy of Alan Hamilton's statement?
I do not, sir.
Okay.
Counsel does.
I-
I've got it. Sure. Defense exhibit, I think, number 20. Well, it's in the back. Defense exhibit number 20. It's publication. Excuse me. Yeah, number 21.
For the record, it's defense exhibit number 21. May I approach the witness?
You may.
Detective Proctor, I'm going to ask that you look at that statement, not only look at it, but I'm going to ask you to read it to yourself and see if anywhere in that written statement, Mr. Hamilton stated that it was dark in the theater, and the second thing I'm going to ask you to do is see if he ever uses the word silhouette in his written statement.
If I may.
That's what. I'll just move it.
I'm sorry, but there's no mention of silhouette here?
Is there any mention of dark?
No, sir.
Mr. Garcia, I think I need to clarify for the record, obviously that has not been admitted yet.
Yes, ma'am. Now, Mr. Proctor, let's talk about notes. I think you indicated on cross-examination, based on questions from Mr. Escobar, that you take notes when you interviewed Mr. Hamilton and Mrs. Hamilton. Right.
That's correct, sir.
And once you have memorialized your police report, you destroy those notes.
I'm going to
I
object.
I do.
Sustained. That was.
Right. You took notes, right?
Yes, sir.
Did you write a police report in this case
Yes, sir, I did.
in reference to your interview with Mr. Hamilton and Mrs. Hamilton?
That's correct.
Did you document in that report what they had told you?
Yes, sir, I did.
Did your notes comport with the report?
Yes, sir, they did.
After the report was written, did you then destroy the notes?
Yes, sir, I did.
Was there anything different in the notes as compared to the report?
No, sir, there wasn't.
All right. Now, on cross-examination, Mr. Escobar went to great lengths asking you, well, did you ask Mr. Reeves about his disabilities? Did you go into this? Did you go into that? Do you remember that?
Yes, sir, I did.
On the second interview, did you ask Mr. Reeves, is there anything else you want to tell me?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay. Now, let's talk about on cross-examination. Mr. Escobar asked you, Mr. Proctor, did you go into the theater and did you ask him to put the manager to put the lights on and the previews on and so on and so forth, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, as you're sitting here today, Mr. Proctor, is there any way that you could have gone back in time and done everything in that theater exactly the way it occurred on January 13, 2014? And by that, I mean, have the defendant sitting in the same seat, his wife there, obviously all the other witnesses that were in that theater, right?
Yes, sir.
With the previews playing at the volume with the correct lighting at that time.
That's
No.
also speculation as to whether he could have done it or not. I mean, we'd have to bring the witnesses in.
Judge?
Oliver.
Right?
There's no way you can recreate it.
Okay. Mr. Escobar went into great lengths about you going in there and you sitting and seeing this, right?
Yes, sir.
Does it matter what you saw or you heard?
And
If it's you,
yes, sir.
it doesn't matter, right?
No.
Judge, I'm going to object. Move to strike. Leading.
Sustained.
Move to strike.
Rephrase.
Mr. Proctor, what's important is what the defendant saw through his own eyes.
That's correct.
What he saw, what he heard, not you.
That's correct, sir.
May I have a moment?
You may.
Because I don't have any further questions of
Can we
Mr.
approach
Proctor.
real quickly?
Yes. Released. You're probably going to be on standby. Standby. All right, Mr. Proctor, you're free to go, but if you do get called back, you have to come. Okay? If you do get called back, you have to come back.
Yes, ma'am.
But-
I'm out of this area. Can you give me a day's notice?
We will, Your Honor.
All right,
Thank you.
you'll get a day's notice.
Thank you, Your Honor. It's good seeing you.
You too.
Yes. Been a while.
State?
The state would call Mark Turner.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give in this call to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Go ahead, Mr. Rosenwasser.
Thank you. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Can you please state your name and spell your first and last name for the court reporter?
Mark Turner, Markturner.
And you don't have to tell us exactly where you live, but what city do you currently live in?
Brandon,
All right. And back January 13th of 2014, what city are you living in?
Wesley Chapel.
Are you currently employed?
I'm retired.
All right. What did you do before you were retired?
26 years in the Air Force and 10 years in the aviation industry.
Okay, and just very, very briefly, we don't need an entire history, but very briefly, what did you do in the Air Force?
I began as an enlisted man and then went to officer training school, aviation school, and spent most of my time in the intelligence arena.
Back on January 13th of 2014, did you go to the Cobb Theater to see the movie Lone Survivor?
I did.
And who'd you go there with?
My wife.
All right. Is there a particular part of the theater that you sit in when you go to the movie theater?
I usually try to find an aisle seat up high.
And were you able to do it on that particular day?
Yes, sir.
When you went into the Cobb Theater, so you walk up a ramp to get in there, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
All right, then you have to turn around to your left or right, depending on what side of the theater you're on.
Yes.
And you look back at the seats, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, when you walked in, do you recall whether or not the previews were playing at that time?
They were.
Do you recall what the lighting conditions were like?
Dimmed, but you could see your way through pretty clearly.
All right, and we're obviously going to be talking about a shooting. The lighting conditions that you're going to describe now, were they the same lighting conditions at the time of the shooting?
Yes.
All right, so let's tell the members of the jury about that. Was it dark like when the actual movie is playing?
No,
All right, so there's lights on at this point.
that's correct.
All right, not the full house lights, but I guess as you indicated, dimmed.
Yes.
All right, so when you're looking at the entire theater, can you see the rows?
Yes.
Can you clearly see them?
Yes.
Can you see people sitting in the rows?
Yes.
How about the aisles? Clear enough to see the aisles?
Yes.
Clear enough to see the steps?
Yes.
Did you have any concern for your safety? And I don't mean like in a super dangerous way, but walking up to go find seats.
No.
All right. Did you need a flashlight from your phone or anything like that?
No, sir.
Could you see 5, 10 seats away from you?
You could.
All right. So you make your way up to where? Is it the back row?
Back row, I sat in the first seat on the aisle. My wife sat inward.
Okay. So if the screen's behind me and you're facing the theater, were you on the left side of the theater or the right side of the theater?
On the right side.
Okay. Well, that'd be facing the screen. You're on the right side.
That's correct.
All right. So if you're sitting, you're all the way to the right of the theater in the back row.
That's correct.
All right. Now, when you sat down, you indicated the lighting conditions were the same as you described it.
Yes.
All right. You recall what the volume was like?
It was elevated, but you could still converse
Okay, and when you say elevated, that's coming from whatever's coming from the movie theater screen.
Right.
All right. And did you have any difficulty hearing your wife, the person you came with?
Not at all.
Did you have any difficulty hearing anyone else around you at that point?
Not so much. No.
All right. Could you hear, the chattering in the movie theater?
Yes.
Right. Could you specifically hear what people were saying, or maybe the better way is, were you listening to other people's conversations?
No.
All right. So you couldn't hear the conversation because you weren't paying attention to it,
Correct.
but you could hear that people were talking.
Yes.
I'm going to object. It's about 10
Last-
leading questions.
I understand.
Last two. Sustain.
Based on the level of the volume in the theater, did you have any difficulty hearing anyone else?
No.
All right, we're going to be talking about the shooting incident. First of all, did you know any of the people involved in the shooting?
I did not.
Did you later learn the name of the person that did the shooting?
Yes.
And what was that person's name?
Curtis Reeves.
All right. Did you later learn the name of the person that was shot?
I did.
And what was his name?
Chad Oulson.
All right. And we're just doing that just so it's easier to describe to the members of the jury who everyone is. When you first sat down in the theater, was the defendant Curtis Reeves there?
He was not.
Right. Did you see him at some point in time?
I caught him just as he was approaching my aisle, coming back from wherever he had been.
All right. Did you have an opportunity to watch him come up?
Briefly, yes.
All right. Is there anything about what you saw of him that led you to believe that he had difficulty walking?
Not that I noticed.
Okay. He didn't have a cane or a wheelchair or anything like
No.
that? Did he go by you?
He did.
All right. And did you watch him as he went down the row?
Only in the sense that I turned in that direction to move my knees out of the way so that he could get by. And of course, he was in my field of vision. I saw him go back to his seat.
Okay. Did you see him lean forward or do anything like that when he got to his seat?
Not really. I saw him take his seat. I didn't pay much attention at that time. I was just really kind of scanning the room.
Okay. And based on the lighting conditions, did you have any difficulty seeing him?
No.
All right. At some point in time after he returned to his seat, did you see any contact between him and Chad Oulson?
I did.
Okay. And what did you see at this point?
Just Mr. Reeves leaned forward. There was apparently an exchange.
Okay. And when you say exchange, could you hear exactly what was being said at that point in time during that exchange?
I could not.
Okay. You just know there was an exchange.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
At this point, did you notice whether or not Chad Oulson was standing or sitting?
He was standing.
While Chad Oulson was standing, did you hear him say anything?
I did, yes.
And what did you hear him say?
He said, do you mind? I got a message or a text from my babysitter. I'm checking on my daughter.
Could you hear the defendant say anything in response to that?
I could not.
After that response from Chad Oulson, what was the next thing you saw happen?
Well, something, I guess something was said. I saw a reaction from Chad Oulson where he reached across and grabbed popcorn from Mr. Reeves and flipped it back in his face.
Okay. And when you saw that happening, do you know where? Let me ask you this: do you know if anyone was with Chad Oulson at the time?
His wife. He was with his wife.
Okay. When Mr. Olson reached over and grabbed the popcorn,
Yes.
did you see what his wife was doing?
I did not. Before the incident, all that I had seen was her hand go up to his chest, as if to coax him to sit down.
Okay. And do you recall if she was standing, sitting?
My recollection is that she was sitting.
And do you know how it was that she positioned her hand? Do you recall which way it was facing?
It was her left hand and on his left side of his chest.
Okay. And do you recall, let's say that if she was wearing a wedding ring, was the wedding ring facing Mr. Olson or facing Mr. Reeves?
It would have been Mr. Reeves.
Okay. So her hand, I'm just using myself as a demonstrative aid, would be just this way facing.
Yes.
Okay. Now prior, well, let me skip ahead just for a moment. After you saw Mr. Olson, you said, how did he throw the popcorn?
He reached across, grabbed the popcorn, and just kind of brought it back and then flipped it, kind of with the flip of the wrist back into the face of Mr. Reeves.
What happened right after that?
Well, I saw Mr. Reeves' arm come up from his side, extend. I saw a muzzle flash and heard the gunshot, and Mr. Olson was shot.
Was that fairly quickly after the popcorn toss?
It was very, very quickly.
At any point in time, in this entire time that you're watching, do you ever see Mr. Olson climbing over his row into the defendant's row?
No, sir.
Okay. And are you sitting in the defendant's row?
I'm in the defendant's row, that's correct.
Okay. And where is Mr. Olson in relation to the defendant?
One row below.
Okay. And at any time did you see Mr. Olson climbing into the defendant's row?
No, sir.
At any point in time, did you see, other than the popcorn flip, Mr. Olson throw anything at the defendant?
I did not.
At any time did you see Mr. Olson punch the defendant?
No, sir.
At any time did you see Mr. Olson in a position where he's leaning over the chair as if to punch the defendant?
No, sir.
At any time did you hear the defendant exclaiming or yelling anything that would give you the impression he was being attacked?
I did not.
Okay. Did you get the impression from anything that the defendant was doing, physically or saying, that gave you the impression that he was in a life or death struggle?
No, sir.
So you're telling this jury the only thing you saw was Mr. Olson flip popcorn?
Yes, that's correct.
At any time did you see the defendant grab his head as if he was injured or hurt in any manner?
No, sir, I didn't.
And that would be before the popcorn?
Correct. No, I didn't see anything. of
And
that
at any
nature.
time did you see him act as though he had been injured?
No, sir.
Did you ever hear Mr. Olson threatening the defendant?
I did not.
Did you ever see Mrs. Olson standing in front of Chad Oulson trying to hold him back as if this raging guy was trying to get into the defendant's row?
No, sir.
After the shot, did you hear the defendant say anything?
Yes.
Okay, and what was it that you heard the defendant say?
Throw popcorn in my face.
After the shooting, did you see what the defendant did with the firearm?
He brought it back and appeared to lay it in his lap.
Okay. Did someone come up to him at some point in time and take the firearm from him?
Yes.
After Mr. Olson was shot, did you see what happened to him?
He said, "I can't believe this," and he turned toward his row and took a step or step and a half and collapsed.
Okay. At some point in time, did you see Mrs. Olson?
Yes.
Okay. And what was she doing when you saw her?
Well, she was hysterical, of course, and began running up and down the aisle to where I was at, and my wife was behind me. She had been shot in the finger, and we tried to help her with that. We had some napkins and wrapped her finger up, and
Okay, so when you saw Miss Olson, you saw her finger?
yes,
And what did it look like?
it looked like it was hanging on by the skin.
So you helped her at that point?
Tried to, yes.
All right. At some point in time, did deputies from the sheriff's office come to the theater?
Yes.
All right. Did you stay in the theater the entire time, meaning from the time of the shooting until the time deputies came into the theater, or did you do something else?
Well, I had, in an effort to help Mrs. Olson, I had asked her if there was someone that I could call, and trying to catch up with her, we wound up down at the exit by the screen and stepped outside, and I asked her if I could call someone to help her if she wanted to check on her children or whatever, and she said yes and gave me her cell phone and told me who to call.
Okay. Did deputies eventually get to the theater?
Yes.
All right. At some point in time, were you given a form, sometimes referred to as a written statement, to fill out?
Yes. Well, actually, I had to go find it, but there was a gentleman in the room that people kind of migrated to get the form. It was pretty disorganized at that point.
Okay. Did anyone give you any instructions about how to fill it out, how much, how little, anything like that?
No, sir.
All right. So you just put in there the details you thought would be important.
Yes.
All right. Did you assume at some point you'd be interviewed by someone in law enforcement?
Yes,
Were you in fact interviewed by someone in law enforcement?
I was.
At any point in time, did you discuss all the details of what you saw with people that were in the theater that you did not know?
No.
Everything you're testifying to, is that what you personally heard
That's correct.
and personally what you observed?
Yes, sir.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
You may.
I don't have any further questions, thank you.
Thank you. Cross? Yeah. Lunch now, and we'll take an hour for lunch. I'll ask you to be back at about 1:45, and we'll resume at that point. All right? Remember my instructions during the recess.
All right, so there's a recess for 1 hour for lunch.
Thank you. We'll be in recess as well for an hour. We'll see you back at 1:45. Oh, yeah, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Michaels. And for the record, we do have present and has been present the entire day is Mr. Scott Rosenwasser for the state, Mr. Manning Garcia for the state, Mr. Glenn Martin for the state, Mr. Richard Escobar for defense, Mr. Dino Michaels for defense, Mr. Reeves has been present the entire time, and Mr. Matt Funderburg and Miss Lopez as well. Flores, I'm sorry. All right. Yeah, I know she's back there somewhere. And Mr. Turner, you can take a lunch as well. Just be back at about 1:45, okay? Thank you.